So you're the brave ones. Okay. Well, you're the ones that showed up after we warned everybody. So if you didn't get the warning, and folks who are joining us online may not know, if you're not comfortable with questioning some things that you were told very young when you started church not to question, you're in the wrong place. But well, let me just start off by sharing an understanding that I think makes a real difference. And as we want to look back at this stuff that was written thousands of years ago, I think it's helpful to take a look at who's here today. You are either equally or more intelligent, far more educated, and have much greater spiritual knowledge than anyone writing anywhere in the Bible.
Amen.
And that means it's okay to ask questions and to actually use that beautiful intelligence to evaluate what's there. And I don't know about you, but when I heard that take it on faith thing in a church, I figured they just didn't know. So actually I'm doing something non-unity today. Now, where I end up because it works for me, but part of unity's focus is always on that place where we gather and understand and share. So I'm going to go into today a little place where we don't necessarily share quite that completely. So I really want to look at, just to be authentic with you, to share with you my Jesus. Okay, and that's not necessarily the one that I encountered when I first as a young person went to church, or even as an adult when I tried to study and ask questions. So let's start with the God thought. Now, remember, we are talking about a very primitive people, okay, who are trying to look at their world and make sense of it. The experience that they had was of feeling anxiety about life, about feeling very vulnerable. They had some sense of something greater, but they didn't know what it was. And so they looked and figured there's got to be something greater that's guiding this and unfolding it. And that must be God. Now, it wasn't them. They could figure that out. But they couldn't really see God. Now, it's not that they didn't try to, okay? Remember that Moses coming down and they were melting everything together to make a golden calf because they could worship that. So they were really into a God out there somewhere, even if they had to pretend that it was real when they knew it wasn't. Okay, so we get to this God that's out there, and because there's no other place, and the biggest thing they see is the heavens, they put him up there. So, and of course he was a him. So God's up there. So now, what this God, because life's a little insecure, so what they want to do is they want to have this God on their side. So you got to have rules to know what you got to do to get God on your side. And you can tell if God's not on your side because you get sick, or your crops don't grow right, or the other guy's army wins. Okay? And you can tell if God's on your side because you're well and you get money and you win. Okay, so it was easy to figure out when God was intervening for you or against you. Okay, now, what they were pretty sure of was that because God ran everything and all the natural events were the result of God. They didn't have plate tectonics and, weatherman giving them satellite pictures on their televisions. So they understood that that was God intervening and running things. So God was working here, just not in and through us. Now, this guy Jesus shows up. And people wanted to share about the experience that they had with him. So they want to talk about something that's greater than they'd been experiencing. And the way that they do that is by talking about a God experience or a God presence. There's only one problem. God's out there. So if that's true, if they're experiencing something in him that's greater, then they've got to get God down here. Now there's a fabulous device for doing that. Virgin birth. Okay. Now, let me ask, anybody ever kind of question that when you heard about it? Okay. Oh, ye of little faith. Okay. Now, you may also be aware that virgin birth isn't a particularly new idea. It happened for Horace, and it happens for Dionysus, and it happens for, over in the Americas, it's Quetzalcoatl, and for Krishna and Buddha and Jesus. Not a new idea. Perhaps an archetype that we touch when symbolically we try to understand things. So this isn't a new or unique experience we've got going here. Okay. Now, if you get God down here, then at the end you've got to get God back up there. Now, the Bible is probably the most studied book in the world. Okay, and there's been some marvelous, marvelous scholars that have looked at it. And all that the scholars pretty much agree on is, yes, Jesus lived and he was probably crucified. Everything else they tend to have some difference. There's actually one point where a high percentage agreed on a few pages in the Gospels that might be Jesus. A wonderful thing called the Jesus Seminar. And those are pretty well limited to a few of the parables. Okay, that's what the scholars say. Okay, so we've got to get Jesus back up to heaven. Now, because it was crucified, okay, then we've got to resurrect the body. Now, you got to do that because we aren't talking about high spiritual concept here. You got to have the body. Not the spiritual self, the body. That's what's important. So you got to get the body up, and then everybody has to stand around and watch while it goes up. So they can report and say, aha, that's God. Called the myth. Get him down, do God things here, and get him back up. Okay, now, the God things get interesting. Anybody ever question that walking on the water thing? Isn't it? Did that seem a little strange? What's not? I've walked on the water. We call it ice skating in Montana. Okay. But the Middle East is warmer. No, you can't walk on the water. But, you see, a God being interferes with the natural, has control over. So that becomes part of that story. Becomes part of the myth that is told to support the God thought. Primitive God thought. Now, so let's just pretend that this wasn't a God descending into the earth. That this was a guy, okay, who couldn't do what you can't do. Didn't raise the dead. That's part of the myth. Didn't go around healing everybody. Okay. Didn't conjure food out of thin air. Just a guy. So let's just make that assumption for a moment. Now, if we begin to do that, then what happens is we begin to get a little suspicious of the gospel writers. Okay? Now, especially if we start looking at those miracles they're reporting. Okay? And part of that is because they aren't just any miracles. They happen to be the miracles that the two big figures in their culture, Moses and Elijah, had done, only more and better. Our guy's better than your guy. Okay, now, so we look at this, and it's hard for us. Okay, it's hard for us as Westerners because our culture is content-oriented. And we look at something that says, does it say that there? And if that's not an accurate description of what actually happened, we say you're a liar. And we reject that. That wasn't a content culture. They were a context culture. They communicated not by accurate history. They told stories. They told stories that gave comparisons of things they were trying to touch and understand. It was the way they engaged, why they did questions. Do you really think that they believed that God drowned all the children and the mothers and the fathers because they weren't behaving themselves right and put one family in an ark with all the animals? They're smarter than that. So are you? That's how they communicated, was through stories. And it wasn't about the accuracy of the stories. It was about the questions that it brought up. It was about the discussions that it engendered. It was about the exploration of what God was and what this was that took place. So they weren't lying to us. They simply did not write for Americans. We weren't invented yet. Okay. So out of this story, let's start by throwing out everything that doesn't make sense. And just step back and see what's left. Well, probably a precocious little Jewish boy who, as he grew up, got very excited about that God idea. Now, how he studied, well, I'm going to get into him next week. But at least let's say he was able to study and look, and when people experienced him, they came away wanting to talk about something greater. Okay, they were touched. They were changed. And the world around them began to change. Here was someone who began to crumble their security blankets. Now, in cultures, our security blankets are how we control the world around us, who we let in and who we let out, how we all know our roles. Okay? And one of the roles that everybody knew was where women were, which was less than. They were like property. If a woman was being mistreated, she should just put up with it. If a guy didn't like his woman, 3 times. I divorce thee, I divorce thee, I divorce thee. She's gone, no property, out in the street on her own. That's chattel. But this guy, not only that he connect with and talk with the women. He had women disciples. He actually treated them like intelligent beings of value. When they were viewed as unclean during the menstrual cycle, the woman was viewed as unclean. When you're unclean, you're excluded. You're not touchable. Woman with the flow that would not stop comes up and is included and healed and accepted. No uncleanness. Nothing wrong with being the people we are. The big definition of who we are, Jew and Gentile. But he didn't seem to notice that. He shared his support and his love and his connection with people that were not Jewish to the same extent as if they were Jewish. And of the Gentiles, when you get down to the bottom of the stack, there were a group of people called Samaritans, and they were the bottom because they had Jewish origins. And they had abandoned the Jewish religion, and they weren't pure and all that sort of thing that the society demanded. And he's constantly bringing them forward as pictures of spiritual wisdom and strength. And he actually goes there. Not only that, when he expresses his deepest insight into who and what he is, what he's discovering, he shares it with a Samaritan woman. Inclusion, not exclusion. Love, not rejection. The tax collectors were viewed as betrayers because they worked for the Romans, the occupiers. But he embraced them, and the prostitutes and the people who were less than, were equal and valuable. In the experience of love was connection and exception again and again. And I disappointed he had never got a chance to comment on homosexuality so we could see inclusion there too. Get rid of this story that's being told. Okay. Inclusion, exception, and enfolding. Recognizing the beauty and divinity in each life and how it's being lived. Not on death, not on sin, not on wrong. Woman taken in adultery, neither do I condemn you. Life, love, acceptance. Without a single miracle. Without coming or going from heaven. But touching. Touching people so that they had to talk about it. They had to tell it. They had to share it with others because it meant so much to them. And all they had was the God thought of their day. And they shared that. What a beautiful thing. And how foolish we are if we want to take it literally. How much meaning there is when we touch what's within there. So what happened? A new God thought. I think this is the first Episcopal I've quoted. A marvelous man by the name of Bishop Spong, book, Jesus for the Non-Religious. Worth getting. Bishop Spong says, and who is God? God is not a figure in the sky who thinks and acts, who feels and directs. God is the ground of being, God is seen whenever one has the courage to be, and God is not alien to or separated from that being. Oneness. In Jesus of Nazareth, men and women saw the fullness of life being lived, the depth of love being shared, the courage to be being revealed. To them, Jesus made known the meaning of life and love and being. He revealed God. And whenever God is seen in human life, the power is called Christ. As we're talking about this beautiful spiritual self that you are. The more you step into, the more you express it, the more you let that love and wisdom and power flow through you, we see the divine in you. We see the Christ self. That beautiful potential of being, the expression of who you really are. You revealed God, and whenever God is seen in human life, the power is called Christ. You are the Christ Jesus. That was the claim. You are the Christ, for in your life we have seen the meaning of all life. In your life we have seen the source of all love. In your being we have seen the ground of all being. New God thought. Christ is not a Messiah sent to come save an oppressed view from the army of the moment, but rather awakening beings, finding the amazing power of love that brings life and goodness and wholeness here and now. So if we throw all that out, what we end up with in my book is magnificent. And I can't really throw it all out. You see, in my experience, I've been aware of so many what those people would have called miracles. Now, I'm there to throw out all the divine intervention. God likes you, zap, you're okay now. That doesn't work. Doesn't work for me. Not happening. But through the beautiful laws through which we create our life, we have the power to transform. We have the power to open to this beautiful spiritual presence within us and to lift ourselves into higher and higher levels of expression at every level of our being. And sometimes that looks in a way that frees us from where we were and we step into where we could be. And that's a miracle. Not divine intervention, but a magnificent law. And what I've seen is that when somebody really loves and that connection happens, so often it helps us make that step. He never said, I healed you. Never said, I'm going to intervene in your life. Said, your faith has made you well. Your ability to receive that greater capacity within yourself to be whole, to be wise, to be at peace. So my guess is, as they watched, some things they would have called miracles probably happened. And I've never known anybody, if you heard one good story about something, couldn't come up with 3 or 4 more. So my guess is they didn't all happen. And some of them I'm pretty sure didn't happen at all. I still am not going to go for the walking on water. I just can't do it. But I understand the people that wrote and tried to capture those stories and share what they were. And I appreciate them. And I have no intention of believing them literally. What really happened there, I don't know. And neither does anybody else. So when they tell you, flag number 1. Now, I want to go back to one of the most interesting questions for me, which is resurrection. Because I'm real glad to throw it out. I don't have a problem with that. Because what's important there had nothing to do with the physical body. But something is being talked about there that they're trying to touch. So I got thinking about that, and thinking about it in terms of one of the most ridiculous miracles reported. Raising of Lazarus. Okay, guy's been dead 4 days, and Jesus calls him, come out of the tomb, and he walks out. No, thank you, I don't buy it. First of all, by then he'd had enough sense to get out of there. Okay? And remember, this is a primitive culture. They got to talk about things in terms of body and third dimension. Okay, it's very hard for them to grasp and express that other. So they do it in symbol and they do it in stories. But what might have happened was that Jesus was there. The understanding is that these were people that were close to him. Okay, the two sisters, Mary and Martha, who were sharing with him their grief, frustrated that he hadn't been there to help. Okay, and so there they are. They sit down, and they're caught in the death. And they start to talk about Lazarus. And he starts to share his love of this man, this friend who'd been helpful, and they begin to talk and experience their love, and their hearts open, and they begin to share about how wonderful it was and the things he did and how he teased his sisters. And those things that give life to what we have experienced. And instead of being dead over there, they have a real sense of that beautiful soul being there with them as they share. And as they talk about it, it's as though he walked out and was there with us. I can understand that. You can too. You've experienced it. You've been able to touch that person that was so beautiful in your life. And we stepped to where there was presence, there was connection, there was life instead of death. What a beautiful experience. Yeah, I can go for that one. Now when I think about the resurrection, I've got a lot of questions, but I got to ask if what might have happened. Remember how devastated. Just think, these people were connected with this man. They were inspired by him. And he's crucified. The pain, the grief. And then, maybe it was 3 days, maybe it was 3 months, they began to connect with what he had been sharing with them. What he expressed began to come alive. They began to remember that love and touch it in their own hearts. But it wasn't from him. It was from them. Their love, their excitement, their awareness of how powerful it was. How powerful is it when someone doesn't even need to be afraid of death? Wow! And in that life, it is so full that they step beyond their own fears. And they just have to share. Because it means so much, it's so powerful, their hearts are so full, they have to go share it with the world. That works for me as resurrection. Because that's so powerful. And what they touched in themselves that he helped bring alive for them ignited an understanding of love that today I get to touch. And it helps me. Now the truth is, I don't know what happened. And I'm real glad to throw it all out, because I'm unwilling to work with a God up there because I've seen way too much beauty right down here. But that love thing, whatever was touched there that became so powerful, every time I relate back there, whether it's just a symbol for me or I'm touching into something that was so filled with life, it is still filled with life. That awareness of life and love itself. It helps me. It helps me in the choice that is in front of me. Remember to choose love. That is to me the only thing that counts. That's my Jesus. Bless you.